This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go beyond the big screen.
So welcome back to Beyond the Big Screen. On today's episode, we're going to be reviewing episodes 4 and 5 of the show True Detective, and I highly suggest that you guys go back and listen to our previous 2 episodes. And the first episode in the series, we did a overview of the background of the TV show, the making of, and we did a review of the first episode. Last episode, we did, we tentatively called it the slow burn episodes, getting to know you better. So we did episodes 2 and 3, and episodes 4 and 5 are basically the polar opposite of episodes 2 and 3. What's your initial reactions after watching 4 and 5, Frank?
Well, if you weren't on board with this show after 3 episodes, then episodes 4 and 5 would definitely grab you because, there's so much good action and so much good tension. And it also, we talked about in episode 2 that the second and third episodes, there wasn't a lot of forward momentum for the case. And there definitely is in these 2 episodes. So, they're both awesome, and they both include some of the best editing of the series.
Yeah. I was talking to my father-in-law about this show the other day, and he mentions, I couldn't get into it. But he watches all these like NCIS and CIS shows, and I couldn't understand. I'm like, this is probably one of the best cop shows ever made. I said, did you at least make it to 4 and like episode 4? I said, no, I gave up after episode 2 or something like that. He's like, oh, it was too slow. I didn't understand it. It was too weird. And I was
not everybody wants to take that particular kind of ride. I mean, as we discussed, it's a slow burn in some ways, and the philosophizing that Rust does, is part of the attraction for many of us. But, for some people, that's like oh my God, come on, where's the killer? Where's the clues? And they just don't, it's not the kind of story they want to watch. And, that's the great thing about art, you can pick and choose.
Yeah. I played a little game this week at work a little bit, or like sometimes I would pretend to act like Rust. Just to kind of see, people's reactions
flip off
to
your
it.
Partner,
and
raise your hand in a meeting with your boss,
just like philosophizing and stuff like that, and like just the way Rust is, and like it's like, yeah, I could see. You could definitely sometimes you could see like somebody's getting a little uncomfortable, being like, oh, what are you even talking about? Like, I don't understand what you're talking about, but it sounds pretty depressing. There's
that moment early in this episode where Marty sits down next to Charlie Lang and says, what would that be like, having to have somebody spout crazy stuff in your ear all day long, and he's staring at Rust. And so the show definitely hasn't let go of that same idea that, Rust is a little crazy.
We'll give you like a quick rundown of episode 4, and then start getting into some of the major plot points and themes that we took out of episode 4. So in 1995, Charlie Lang says he showed pictures of Doria to Reggie Ledoux, to Marty and Rust. Marty tracks down an associate of Ledoux and forces him to reveal Ledoux's meth operation with the Iron Crusaders, a biker gang of East Texas that Russ used to have relationships with. Russ takes a personal leave of absence. I believe that he claims his father is dying or is sick, to prepare himself for the undercover operation. Lisa reveals Marty's infidelity to Maggie. Maggie leaves. Marty confronts Maggie at her workplace. I believe she's a nurse or some kind of doctor. I think she's a nurse. Regardless, he goes to the hospital, confronts her, saying, like, you're not going to take my family away from me, which is one of the more wild scenes of the show. And then Russ goes fully undercover. Marty tags along. He's back up. Russ ends up having to do a job with the Iron Crusaders to get to the Reggie Ledoux connection. It all goes to crap. And one of the best shot scenes in cinema and TV history, they end up just stealing his connection. This gentleman named Ginger. The nickname is self-evident because he is a ginger. And yeah, that ends episode 4 with them driving away with Ginger tied up in the back of his truck or back of their car.
Should be noted that this undercover operation is completely off book at this point. So Marty and Rust have gone completely off the reservation, as they say. They're on their own. They're conducting an illegal operation technically here. So that makes it even more dangerous for a variety of reasons, obviously, right? I mean, they have insufficient resources, so they're relying basically on their own, on their own wits and what little resources they have. I mean, Marty's got a phone and a police scanner and his gun, in a car, and that's about it, right? And he's Rust's only backup, and he almost loses him there at the biker club. I mean, he uses a ruse to get inside the VIP area there, the members only area, to see him, leaving on a boat into the bayou, but he's got no idea where he goes. I mean, that there's so many ways that could have gone wrong,
Well, not to mention they're all drunk. They're drunk and on drugs for the majority of these 2 episodes, right? So, like, that's the part that blows my mind. I get into it a little bit, like with Russ, I get it, right? Because he has, he's being an undercover cop. Like, these guys have to believe that he's a biker. But once we get to those scenes, we'll discuss a little bit about it. Because I pointed out something about how Marty's a pretty productive alcoholic. So, yeah,
it's an interesting observation. But let's start with where the episode begins. It's an interrogation of Charlie Lang, their second. They go back at him because they feel like he might have been holding out information.
Yeah. So, Marty and Russ basically, they interrogate Charlie Lang, and we find out like at the end of the interrogation, there was some kind of deal in place or whatever. But Charlie Lang talks about how he showed pictures of Doria Lang to Reggie Ledoux. They were married, but they were only married half the time. I believe that's what he says. And Marty goes at him hard, saying, you tell us more or what have you.
He basically accuses him of having Ledoux kill his ex-wife, So, he takes a hard stance with him, but it's obvious that that's not what Charlie Lang did. He just had the unfortunate bad luck to be housed with Reggie Ledoux, and Ledoux's a big guy, and he didn't want to tick him off, and then he repeated a whole bunch of the crazy things that Ledoux was saying, and they were all like, they weren't super specific in terms of like, oh, that's actionable, like that's an actionable piece of evidence, but they were specific enough to seem to tie into, the sort of mysterious cult-like activity that they'd been aware of already. And that matches up pretty well to the Dora Lang killing, the crime scene that we saw in episode 1. So, he's a pretty good witness in that respect. And he gives them Tyrone Weems as an associate of Reggie Ledoux, and that's an actionable lead that they can to try to run down. Of course, as we see in later scenes, it takes a while. He's kind of off the grid a little bit. I mean, they talk to several people, and before Marty finally runs into him. He doesn't run into him; he finds him. But I think one of the most interesting things about this scene, and you mentioned it in the notes, is when we get to the end and Charlie asks as they're leaving if, him showing Reggie Ledoux the pictures of Dora Lang was what got her killed. And Rust shows no mercy, does he?
He just tells him straight up, he's like, I'm sure it didn't help. Do you think you should have showed her the pictures? And they just kind of walks away from it. And I also point out that Reggie also mentions that Reggie and his partner are cooking meth and other hallucinogenic drugs, and he also mentions LSD, and he also mentions about Carcosa and where he heard
Yellow King. He said the Yellow King too, didn't he?
Yep, and he heard rumors about them killing kids in Carcosa, which is Russ's perspective much more understandable. It's like you're hearing these rumors about these guys, and then you show them pictures of your wife. Like, what were you thinking, right? And the first thing that comes out of Reggie's mouth is he talked that, and I think this is why Russ has the reaction that he did. He goes, well, what about the deal? He's not showing repentance for what he did with Doria at all, right? Or, feeling even a little bit bad about maybe partially being responsible for her death. And Russ just looks at this guy and says, screw you. Why do you deserve redemption? You're a drug addict, degenerate, criminal that's partially responsible for showing pictures of your wife to the guy that at this point they think killed her.
You served her up as a target, and Russ sees through people pretty well, and he points out, Charlie's first inclination was to ask about his end first, and then he's concerned about Dora, and so he has no mercy. So that's, one of the things about Rust, we talked about, are you more like Rust or are you more like Marty? And I think my argument was everybody's more like Marty. People may have a little Rust in them, but nobody's more like Rust because nobody is that, anyway, very few people at least. Nobody is that sure of who they are and what they believe and don't care what anybody else thinks to the degree that Rust doesn't care. And he just does, he cares only about a few things in this world, and your feelings and what you think of him are not two of them, And so, he freed of the shackles of social niceties, or at least caring about them, he can see people pretty clearly. And that's what I think he did with Charlie. He saw exactly what was going on with Charlie. Marty, on the other hand, was sympathetic, right? In the next shot, they're talking about finding Tyson Weems or Tyrone Weems, I think it is. Sorry. Talking about finding Weems and Marty's like, hey, you didn't have to tell him it was his fault. He was already down. And that's when we get Russ's explanation, as to why he did. And then he kind of mocks Marty a little bit. He's like, the things you get soft about, Marty, it's like he kind of calls Marty on his priorities, I guess, his emotional priorities.
Well, I think Russ' ruthlessness I think it hit Marty's like deep in his soul, right? Like he's looking at somebody like Charlie. He's like, you deserve like no redemption at all, right? And Marty's a little bit, like we talked about this. He's like probably attends church on Easter, maybe Christmas type Christian. So I think that's a kind of in the back of his head. It's like, no matter how bad you are, you deserve some kind of redemption. And you look at the way Marty's leading his life, it's not, no, I'm not going to compare. Like he's not a degenerate drug dealer hanging out with people that are potentially killing kids, but he's cheating on his wife. He's sleeping with prostitutes. He uses people not that much different than the way Charlie does. It's just not as disgusting. Right? Like that's the way I looked at it. And Marty feels like, am I the type of person that doesn't deserve any kind of redemption whatsoever? You mentioned earlier, right. Like if I was in Rust's position and I was dealing with somebody like Charlie, and I'm like a cop, and it's like an interrogation setting, and I don't have to deal with this guy ever again. Like he gave me everything that he knows. I would have said the same thing to him.
That's the thing, though, in that profession. You get lots of opportunities to deliver some zingers if you want to, that you're in a lot of situations that can be tense, and that, the opportunity is there to get a jab in or whatever. And I'm not going to say I didn't take a few of those opportunities, but I kind of regretted the majority of them, because you never know if there's going to be a next time. And one thing people remember, and this isn't just cops and criminals, this is, all of life, but one thing people remember is how you treat them. And so, they're never getting another word out of Charlie Lang unless it's strictly business. He's going to be a hard nut to crack if he comes up with some information ever again. So I agree with you. I would want to say the same thing, and maybe I would too. But that's a consideration that people don't often look at, is that there is going to be a next time, probably, because Charlie Lang is not reforming.
Yeah, well, I understand. Yeah, it's the nature of the crime that happened, right? With the antlers and the fact that this Charlie knew, or at least had heard rumors that, this had happened to a couple of other people and a couple other kids, and he hadn't gone to the police about it. It's screw you.
Or you would have think he would have mentioned something during their first interview if he was actually a good person in any way. So I'm with you. I think he's a total waste of skin. But, the fact is in law enforcement that sometimes those folks can still be the ones who give you that vital piece of information. And, you don't want to tank future investigations just to get satisfaction, for yourself there, because that's all you're doing there, right? You're not trying to change him. You're not trying to change the world. Really, that was kind of selfish on Rust's part. Not that he was wrong, but, that's the only thing he accomplished was, his own satisfaction. And so I'm just injecting a little realism into this, and not that this isn't a very real show, because it is in many, many ways, but it's just a consideration you don't often see brought up. I mean, in fiction, most of the time they're concerned with just whatever the case is that the story is about. And the thing about actual law enforcement is that there's always another case coming. There's always another call coming across the radio, and you're not going to show up one day at the police station and then see the chief locking things up and telling you that, crime has been solved and you need to find a new career. I mean, it's just the way it is, right? And so you kind of have to have an eye toward tomorrow, and the interesting thing about it is that I think both Rust and Marty do this really well most of the time. There's that scene where Rust goes in and whacks that guy with the toolbox and gets the information he needs, but he tried to be nice. And, but most of the time, you see them talking in ways that if they came back and talked to the people again, they wouldn't be told to get the hell out. They're respectful of people who I think a lot of people would look down on because of their socioeconomic status or their educational level. And I don't see Marty or Rust condescending to any of them, and so I think they do a good job of this. I think this is just one instance where maybe, his desire to tell Charlie what was what kind of got in the way.
Yeah, I'd say also one other thing of note in this scene is at this point, we've kind of seen Rust where he's a weird guy and like he's depressive and he's kind of suicidal. But I think this is like the first time you see Rust's real kind of coldness. And I think it even shocked Marty. And I think that's one of the reasons why he kind of had the reaction that he did was because at this, like I pointed out just a little bit earlier, at this point, we really haven't seen Rust be this cold. And I think and it shocked Marty really at the end of the day, right? And you'll start seeing more of it as the series goes on, Rust's kind of coldness. So it's like, oh, he's not just like this funny kind of weird guy. It's like, no. This guy's got borderline antisocial personality disorder, right? I wouldn't say because he cares about people so much, I wouldn't say he has it, but he's definitely on like the line, where it's not just like, oh, this guy's just kind of weird. It's like, no, this guy there's something really wrong with him. And actually one of the characters in the next episode, just looking at him, he points it out. So which is really interesting.
Well, and from a storytelling standpoint, I think it's great that he did that to Charlie right away, because, later on in the episode after the breakup and when he rescues Marty from the fracas at the hospital where he's gone to see Maggie, we see more of that behavior from Rust. I mean, Marty's trying to confide in him or to bend his ear or to get sympathy or whatever. And, it's totally classic, right? I mean, the two cops, the partners commiserating in a bar or whatever. I mean, it's a trope, if not a cliche. And yet in this series, Marty starts to bare his heart and Rust says, listen, I'm going to tell you something. This is none of my business and I don't want to hear it. That's just, I thought that was awesome. But it was foreshadowed, not only by his earlier behavior over the first 3 episodes, but very directly by how he treated Charlie Lang. And so we're not surprised by the fact that Rust would do that, even if, because it's so far off of social conventions that we would expect, we are surprised a little bit, but we accept it immediately because it makes sense that Rust would do that. And Rust is hyper focused at that point, right, on the op that they're about to go and do. And he needs Marty to be focused too. And Marty's distracted by something that, Rust finds trivial because, I think he feels like, Marty's marriage was a ticking time bomb anyway, with Marty's behavior. So, this is just when the bomb went off. It wasn't a surprise. But he needs to get Marty focused as well, which is why he does some of the other things he does. But, yeah. So is Rust antisocial? You could argue that. I don't think you're out of line at all to say so. But he definitely does care. It's just he has a very well-developed ethos when it comes to what he cares about specifically. And people like Charlie Lang are part of that equation.
Yeah, so you kind of dipped your toes into, I guess, the other major plot point of this series is Lisa exposes the affair to to Maggie. So, and Marty finds out. He comes home, his bags are all packed, the wife and the kids are gone, and he sees the note. I guess Maggie.
Great acting there too, huh? When he reads the note.
Oh, when he just completely loses it. It was 100. It's 100% believable.
Yeah. I think I read somewhere or heard somewhere that Woody Harrelson asked the director or the writer to, write an actual note full of just horrible stuff, so that he could read it and react to it. So whatever they wrote was a good choice because Woody really nails it. I mean, you see the pain and the rage all at once, and then the attempt to be contrite when he's talking to his father-in-law on the phone, and the way they talk over each other and don't listen to each other. I mean, it's a great scene.
Yeah. And then when he calls Lisa and starts demanding, like, what exactly did you tell her? I think Nick has his penchant for just like, we can't say what he said, but just like this kind of like, it works in this scene. Like, I don't know how he makes it work, but he has like this need to have like kind of like this over the top kind of swearing that works within the context of the scene. And he says this crazy thing to Lisa, and he does it at season 2 of True Detective. I'm trying to Colin Farrell's character when he knocks on that little boy's house or whatever. It starts talking to the you know shoes. What I'm saying?
I do. It's, the thing is people like what we're used to seeing as being high drama on TV and movies is like, life and death stakes and the city's going to blow up stakes or whatever, right? These are the kinds of stakes that are high drama that we're used to seeing. But in someone's actual life, I mean, a potential divorce I think divorce is second only to death as stress inducing, a death, because it's the death of a relationship. So it makes sense. So for Marty to be that amped up over his family leaving him is absolutely 100% believable. Even if, in terms of a TV drama, we might be like, yeah, he's got marital problems. That goes with the territory, cop with a marital problem and he drinks, gee, I've never seen that before. But the reality is that, if you or I came home and found our bags packed in the foyer and a note telling us it's over, take your stuff and move out, we're done. I mean, your whole world comes crashing in at that moment, doesn't it? And so to see the way that Marty reacts, and then he's immediately into damage control, trying to find out how much, how much truth does he have to tell to fix this situation? That's why he's calling Lisa. He wants to know exactly, did she tell him everything? Did she just say it was once? What, how long? I mean, help him craft his lies. I mean, because that's what he's been doing is lying. And then, of course, he tries to be nice to her father-in-law, and he's not having it either. And it's just really, really, it's a very underrated scene in a series full of great, magnificent scenes with incredible tension. This one is actually right up there, even though it's, domestic drama.
Yeah, I've heard a bunch of like really kind of crazy interpretations of this scene where it's just like, well, Lisa did like the right thing and by telling Maggie, and I go, I think Russ is just right when they're talking later at the bar where Russ is like, she's just crazy, like a young, crazy girl. Like if like Lisa was like a moral person, she never would have got involved with a married man in the first place. Like, I think she's just doing this. I think like she showed up. Okay. So initially what started the whole thing was she shows up to the bar. Marty sees her at the bar with another guy. Marty loses his mind. He breaks into the door. This happened. It was the last episode, right, Frank?
It was episode 3, I think. Yeah, but either way, we talked about it last episode.
Yeah, so he breaks in. I'm just kind of laying the groundwork. So he breaks in, loses his mind, says he's not psycho, and then he sees her later at court.
But yeah, you can see he's distracted when he's testifying. His testimony is very rote and very almost like he's doing it from memory because he's distracted by Lisa there. And to her credit, she's being professional in the courtroom. Like she's not showing any reaction at all, but then she follows them out. So, who's more immoral in this situation is a tough conversation to have because Marty's the one who's married and he's having an affair. I mean, is she wrong to be having an affair with him? I mean, I've heard both arguments from people. Like she didn't promise anybody. She wasn't going to sleep with anyone else. So, she's not doing anything wrong. He's the one who's breaking a promise. But then the flip side of the argument is, she knows he's married and, that's wrong. It doesn't really matter where you come down on it. The reality of it is that it's a volatile situation and Marty knows it and she knows it. And they're both doing it for reasons that include liking that volatility, liking that danger. And then it gets out of hand and she clearly doesn't like the way it got out of hand. And the fact that he's not suffering any repercussions for that. And the only power she really has is the power of this secret. And she decides to use it. I don't know if she's crazy or not, to be honest with you. I mean, what makes you say she's crazy? Let's go there.
Because I just want to make clear right off the bat, they're both scumbags. Marty more so than Lisa, right? But Lisa's not much better, right? She knew it's not like Marty lied to her and said like, oh, like he was hiding his wedding ring and all. That's right. Like,
or we're separated or something like that.
Yeah. Like he's straight up like, I'm married. I have kids. She knew that and she still continued to do it. So she obviously didn't care either. Right. I understand she's not the one that made the promise to Maggie, but the sanctity of marriage, not to sound, well, whatever, it sounds old school traditional, but I think society would be a little bit better if we, took that vow a little bit more seriously than we do nowadays, but that's somewhat of a tangent. She knew, and sleeping with a married man is wrong, and pretty much any which way you look at it. I personally think Russ is not wrong. Like Russ mentions to Marty that she probably followed Marty and them to the bar. I wouldn't be surprised. She's a young girl. She's it was fun because he was a married man, so it's dangerous. Now it's going to be fun to start up some drama right before we break thing off, right? Now, I don't think Lisa expected Marty to act as crazy as he did, like breaking into the house and, threatening to basically beat the crap out of the guy, and then claiming that he wasn't psycho. I didn't think she expected that.
He didn't threaten to. He kind of did. He kind of smacked him around a bit.
Smacked him around a bit, right? But he could have done a lot worse. I think he obviously held back, right? But
that's holding back.
I don't think she. What?
I said, if that's holding back, woo.
Well, he didn't break his nose basically, or anything like that.
No, but he kicked in the door and smacked the guy around in the bedroom and asked about their sexual exploits. And, Marty's flat out crazy in this situation too, if you want to use that term. I mean, just like you said, he's, if I'm attaching culpability, I mean, he's more at fault than she is, but yeah, they're both at fault here. And it comes back to what I said. There's volatility there. There's danger. Therefore excitement. And I think they're both feeding off that.
Yeah. And then her going to Maggie in person and telling her, which is just wild. The way I look at it is she doesn't look like, I'm going to expose Marty for the type of man that he is. Like, I think there's a part of it is that, but I also think a part of it is she's just enjoying the drama.
Yeah, I think so. Cause she doesn't say your wife has a right to know who you are so that she can make a choice about whether or not to be with you. That would be a little bit more of a noble reason maybe for exposing the affair she had. Instead, it's about getting him in trouble, right? It's about forcing him to face consequences. So it's about revenge, basically. It's about getting, it's the same thing Russ did with Charlie Lang, right? I mean, he said those things for his own benefit, and she told Maggie about the affair for her own benefit. A huge event in someone's life. I mean, to be facing a divorce for whatever reasons. And I thought Woody Harrelson just really nailed it. And then for the next 10 minutes, it seems like in the show, it's all he can think about. Like, it's all he keeps bringing up. I mean, he buries himself in his work for a little bit there, drinking while he's trying to run down some more leads, and he manages to do that and eventually find Tyrone Weems. And this might be a good point for you to point out your thoughts on his ability to work well while intoxicated.
Steve here. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like Scott Rank's History Unplugged podcast and other great podcasts. Go to parthenonpodcast.com to learn more. And here is a quick word from our sponsors.
Oh yeah, so like after this all goes down, he just starts, he didn't learn anything from it, obviously, because what does he do? It's the drinking is just mainly what got him in trouble in the first place. So he just starts, it's like, well, got to go to the drinking. It's going to solve the problems again. So he starts drinking, but he also just dives into work, right? So like you pointed out, he starts following down leads and he finds Tyrone Weems. He's doing this all while he's drunk, right? So then he finds Tyrone, and then he goes and confronts his wife at her job. And then after confronting his wife at the job about their marriage and the affair that he had, him and Russ start banging out like the rudimentaries of this highly illegal undercover job that they're going to do with this biker gang. After after Marty finds out that the biker gang, well, the people that are getting Reggie's meth and LSD is the Iron Crusaders, right? That's the big reveal. That's the big information he gets of the Tyrone Weems. He's doing this all while he's hammered. I just think it's incredible because I don't know. I haven't drank in like a really, really, really long time, but I remember when I would have a couple wobbly pops and I would not be doing all this. I would be on the, just sitting there talking, and then after a little while, I'm just falling asleep. Like it seems like the drinking gives Marty energy. I guess I'm not an alcoholic, so I don't. Or some alcoholics like this, they get more productive while they're drunk. Because it's funny, if you watch the show, when he's sober, it seems like Russ is doing all the work. But in this sequence, he actually gets a lot of information done. He actually gets a lot of work done.
Yeah, no, he goes to the strip club to follow up on what they got from Tyrone Weems's mother, and he talks to the girlfriend, and she just shines him on, kind of blows him off. So he gets some information from the bartender, and you see how, he tries to be nice a couple of times, and he finally strong arms him a bit. Speaking of which, the guy that plays the bartender is actually the writer, Nick Pizzolatto. He has he plays that role. I guess it'd be a cameo. It's a pretty short role. And then, then he stakes her out and follows her out to that industrial plant where there's a big rave going on, follows her through the crowd and everything, finally finds Tyrone. And then, I would say it's not exactly a standard police interrogation that he engages in, I mean, so while he's definitely able to function well, and I think that's partially because he drinks a lot. I mean, I think he's a guy that has a couple of drinks every night at a minimum. At the same time, his judgment's not the most sound. I mean, he pulls a gun on the guy. I mean, I guess maybe nobody's going to call the cops out there, but he's at that point, he's not off book yet, right? At that point, he's technically still working the case, and I'm sure he's not putting in an overtime slip or whatever, but he could still argue, I was following up a lead. It's all official. And yet here he is pointing a gun in the guy's face, I mean, it's not very great judgment. I mean, he got the results he needed. But it is funny though, that he is very good at functioning while drunk. Interestingly though, later in the episode when he's backing up Rust, Rust is drinking and taking drugs because he has to stay in character, but Marty's not drinking at all. I mean, when he's sitting there monitoring the scanners and waiting for a phone call, he's reading a book, probably something Rust gave him. Yes, probably something on nihilism.
Yeah, so they come up with the rudimentary plans of how they're going to infiltrate this biker bar thing. And it's kind of like the scenes are pretty close together, but like Marty and Russ are talking at the bar, and Russ is giving him his plan. And Marty keeps on trying to bring up marriage problems that he's having. He's like, oh, if I could just get one more chance. And Russ is just not having it at all, right? He's actually pissed. And to be honest with you, people will be like, well, Russ is acting really cold here. It's like, no, I totally get where Russ is coming from. It's like, you dummy took your marriage for granted. You screwed it all up. Now you want to have this little self-pity party about it. And I'm trying to orchestrate this highly illegal undercover operation. And I need your head on straight. Like, we're not talking about this. Like, I'm literally doing something that sent me to the mental institution in the first place. Try to solve this murder. And I know what's going to entail. So, like, we're just not talking about this right now. I don't know if that's the perspective you got, but that's how I felt. And I totally get where Russ is coming from, because it's how I would have felt too. I said, like, we're not talking about this right now. You're not going to solve anything right now about this. Let's just focus on the case.
Yeah, but then he figures out pretty quickly that Marty's not going to be able to do that. That's why he goes and talks to Maggie for him, is to just try to get something that he can give Marty to get him to focus. And that scene with Maggie is another great example of Rust's, his ability to just not care. I mean, as soon as she says something to him that, about, you must have been a great husband, he just gets up and leaves. He doesn't care what she thinks, doesn't care what happens, doesn't care if, it's like, he just doesn't care. And I don't think many people in reality have that degree of could care less that Rust is able to manufacture. I do want to point something out, though, that occurred to me when I was doing the rewatch. It's a little bit of a jump ahead here, but if you jump ahead to the next episode, they spend a good portion of that, the second half of that episode, trying to make the viewer suspect Rust as potentially being the killer. I mean, the two detectives in 2012, Papania, and I can't remember the other guy's name. They basically lay that out for Marty, and they make an accusation towards Rust later in the episode. And they don't know what we know as the viewer, everything that happens here at the end of episode 4 that we're going to get into in just a second. But it just occurred to me that, anybody who's paying close attention, when they get that accusation and that suspicion thrown at them in the next episode, should immediately reject it, because, it doesn't make sense. If Rust really is the killer, and of course, spoiler alert, we know he's not now, but if he really were the killer, and maybe not of Dora Lang, but of someone else, and he's trying to put it on other people, and everything's just a cover up, basically, that he's doing. That's what they accuse him of doing, of using this investigation as to cover up his own murders. Going on a robbery with Ginger and the other Iron Crusaders in order to get to Reggie Ledoux, who, according to them, he already knows, is a completely unnecessary risk. Why would you do that? It's a high risk, low reward proposition, and Rust is way too smart for that. I mean, if he were actually the killer, he would just pass and leave and find another way to get him and Marty to Ledoux. He would invent a CI or something like he did in the interrogation later in 2012, and just lie about it that way. And so, I can't remember how much I was like, "Whoa, is Rust the killer?" That's what they're trying to make me think. And I don't remember how much I bought into that, when I first saw this years and years and years ago. But when I was watching it again, I was like, hey, a careful viewing would completely you would completely reject that proposition just because it doesn't make logical sense. And Rust is a very logical person.
Yeah, when we get to that bit there, we can talk about how successful was the TV show and somewhat making us think that maybe Rust was the killer. But I think they could have done it if they had done things slightly different. But even then, when I was watching my initial run through the show, and then I was watching the whole biker sequence that we're going to get into in a little bit, the more of the details, I was like, that whole sequence doesn't make any sense. If he was why would he do this? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, let's get into that biker sequence there, because you called it maybe the greatest one shot in television history, and I think it's got to be one of the nominees if it's not the winner. I think it is the winner, but it's certainly right up there. From the time they drop Rust off, right, and we start following him, it's like, how long is it? It's like over 6 minutes long.
Yeah.
One shot. And, and it's just it's so frenetic, right? I mean, it's so like you almost feel like you are part of the action, like you are also on the rage. You're also trying to get away. The POV of the cameraman is like right there, and it's not perfect. Like it's not the perfectly framed shot at every moment like you're used to. It's more like somebody turned on their iPhone and ran around, to follow the action.
The entire one shot sequence is reminiscent. It reminded me in terms of its intensity, very much like Heat. In the sense of it's like frenetic pace and how you feel like you're right there in the action with the characters. Brian De Palma is also another famous director for his long, like one take shots. I don't think people realize just how much work goes into doing these one take shots and how much planning goes into making sure they go off flawlessly. It's insane.
Well, just the coordination. I mean, if you watch it again, like when they go in the house, I mean, there's people outside of the house that have to be, checking out the car and coming to the conclusion that they're not real cops and everything, and talking about that when Rust looks through the window, I know they've got guys with walkie-talkies and bullhorns, and everything, orchestrating things, but still, I mean, it's like a ballet that they have to coordinate here, and they just did such a spectacular job of it being, like I said, it's tense, it's frenetic, you're right in the action. Rust doesn't die because he's talking to him in 2012, but boy, you got to wonder what's going to happen. The tension is there, and does Rust make a split decision or what? Things go to hell, and immediately he just decides, I'm kidnapping Ginger and getting the hell out of here. And it takes Ginger, like they're in the back of the police car, I think, by the time he figures out Rust's a cop, which I'm not faulting him for that. He got knocked on the head a few times, and why would he think that of Rust anyway? He watched him do drugs and other stuff. So, but it's just, and in the shot, I was watching it. There are a couple of places throughout the take where if they wanted to splice multiple takes together, they could have. Like there's a shot that goes up into the spotlight of the helicopter, and you could get away with a cut there, and I don't think people would notice. They're running past some hanging laundry, some sheets and stuff, and I think you could probably get away with a cut there that people might not notice. But according to the production crew and Pizzolatto and Fukunaga, it was a single take, and it was, I think, their 9th attempt that finally nailed it. So what a feat, if you, like I said at the top of our episode, if you were like not sure about this show through the first 3 episodes, you're like, well, I'll give it one more. I mean, you would have swallowed that hook whole at that point, I think. I mean, with that last 6 or 8 minutes of the episode.
Yeah, just kind of as a side note, in terms of how they film the whole thing, a lot of these one take shots really feel filmy, right? Like it's like you're watching like kind of a filmmaker doing what he can do at the best of his craft. I don't feel that when I watch a scene. It feels frenetic. It feels real. It doesn't feel like it's self-indulgent at all. Maybe people might disagree with me on that.
There's a saying that easy reading is damn hard writing, and I think it's the same with filmmaking. Like easy viewing is damn hard filmmaking, and so this is a guy at the top of his craft, and the fact that it doesn't show through as, look at me, Ma, I'm doing a single take shot. How cool is that? Instead, you're completely engrossed in it, is, I think, indicative of just how great that, how strong their craft really was. I thought you said something interesting off mic about how this scene kind of interacts with Rust's worldview, and I thought that was pretty interesting. I mean, if you wanted to maybe share that with the listeners.
Well, yeah, while I was watching it, and I'm sure the audience is probably familiar with me kind of going off these maybe weird kind of paths with some of these takes on these shows, but the way I kind of looked at it, I'm like, this is Rust's philosophical outlook manifested. Like you watch this entire sequence, Rust clearly feels like, I'm smarter than everybody else. I'm going to plan and organize this. and it's going to go down the way that I expect it to go down. But goes in direct contradiction to everything Rust talks about in terms of his philosophical outlook. The way he looks at the world is it's generally chaotic. There's generally no purpose. There's no plan. There's no meaning. And to even try to have any of these things, you got to be kind of stupid to think that you can do any one of those things according to his worldview. And as soon as the plan starts going off, it immediately gets screwed up. He thought he was just going to go in there, talk to Ginger, his old biker partner, and they were going to do just a regular, coke for crystal meth, right? And that's how he was going to get the connection. And Ginger's like, no. You got to go on this robbery with me, and then maybe we'll talk about it. And Russ is like, well, that's not part of the plan. You can already tell immediately that he feels uncomfortable doing it. And then he's having to do more drugs leading up to the operation. So then they actually do go on the robbery, and Russ is, supposed to be in charge. Obviously, no one listens, right? They end up shooting the one guy, and the whole plan goes to crap. And Russ is obviously you can tell that he's very upset. He's very pissed off that nobody is following his lead. And he ends up just kidnapping Ginger, spur of the moment type thing, calls Marty and come at this direction. They throw him in the back of the truck. And then you get the panning shot from the helicopter, and you see everybody, and they're kind of like ants. Really, everyone's just kind of running around doing their own thing. No one knows what's going on. It's completely chaotic. There's no order. There's no plan. And I just thought it was interesting, as much as Russ claims that this is his outlook on the world, when it's actually put into practice, he doesn't like it at all. He doesn't like the fact that there's no plan. He doesn't like the fact that he can't read the situation other than just at the spur of the moment. And he's no better off than everybody else that's in that situation, who are just reacting at the spur of the moment. That's what I took away from it. I'm like,
yeah, I think it's an interesting take. I mean, no, you're saying it's a representation of his philosophy, and yet it's kind of been thrown back in his face basically by the situation, right? And I mean, the one thing he does do better than most people is he keeps his cool and he keeps his focus. Like, he decides what his goal is. At this point now, it's going to be screw it, grab Ginger and get out of here. And he's very single-minded about it and very effective at it. In that sense, he's imposing at least a tiny bit of order onto the chaos that's around him. But yeah, I think you make a great point. I think it's an interesting observation, kind of a meta point maybe. And you wonder if perhaps that was, something that they were trying to impart.
Yeah. I'll mention one other thing about this sequence before we move on to episode 5 is, the one thing I did truly appreciate is the bikers were actually scary. Like, my wife was really into that show, Sons of Anarchy, and I watched a couple of episodes, and watching that show, I never felt like these guys were scary, drug addict bikers. And this sequence, in this section of the episode, they're terrifying. They're absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, Sons of Anarchy, they had to be likable, at least, and I think that maybe they had to be the heroes. So you had to kind of keep them likable to a degree. Whereas, Ginger's a fun character, but, if you like Ginger, I think your worldview is a little bit askew. And he's the best of the lot. I mean, if you notice during that scene, the one, Ginger's just there for the money, right? And Rust is there because he has to be. But the other two, I think Mitch is one of them, and I can't remember the other guy's name. One of them is messing with the female in the room there, and looks, like he's being pretty lecherous and sadistic in what he's saying to her, and he's got his face really close to her, and he's obviously threatening her and talking dirty to her or whatever. And then the other guy is just looking for a reason to pop off, and when the guy on his knees there finally yells at him and calls him a cracker and, tells him he's going to get his or whatever, he figures that's good enough, pulls out, takes the gun that he had from the guy and shoots him. And what's Russ saying, do not shoot that, do not pull that trigger, and the guy does it anyway. So they're all three crazy. You nailed it, man. They are crazy, scary dudes. And Ginger's the most rational of all of them, which tells you something about how bad that group is.
Yeah. So I guess, yeah. He also had these crazy eyes. I don't know if you noticed. I don't know if that's just him or if that was the actor just playing that role. I guess trying to show that he's high on drugs or something. But he had like these crazy bulging eyes that just kind of made me feel like a little unnerved.
Yeah, he was spooky. He was spooky.
Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors.
Yeah, so I guess we'll move on to episode 5, and I'll give you guys a little quick run. This episode's a little bit more complicated than the last episode in terms of the timeline. So in 1995, Ginger introduces Rust to Dewall Ledoux, Reggie's cousin and meth cooking partner. Dewall refuses to do business with Rust, but unwillingly leads Marty to a meth lab hidden in the bayou. Marty was not part of the discussion, so he ends up tailing them all the way to the compound. There, Marty apprehends Reggie Ledoux, who makes cryptic messages to Rust about Carcosa and how time is a flat circle and black stars. Marty kills Reggie Ledoux in a rage after discovering 2 kidnapped and abused children, a boy and a girl. Dewall flees but dies after triggering a homemade booby trap. Marty and Rust plant evidence to make it look as though the insane shootout had taken place. A scenario they report to the police investigators and to the cops that they're talking to at the time. They're hailed as heroes. Marty gets a promotion. Rust gets a recommendation for bravery, or what did Marty say in that situation? And sorry, what is the actual thing that he got?
He got a commendation for bravery, and Marty says because he insisted. So you can see that, people not liking Rust, they wanted to heap a lot of the praise for what happened onto Marty, because he was a more likable receptacle for their praise. Even when they come back from the shootout, Major Quesada, is smiling at Rust, but he says, couldn't you have gotten shot? He's got to get a jab in.
Yeah. Okay. By 2002, Marty and Maggie are reconciled. Russ is dating again. While Russ is consulting the police on an interrogation, the prisoner asks for a plea bargain in exchange for about Dory Lang's killer, who he claims is still at large and killing. He mentions the Yellow King, which gets Rust's attention. The prisoner kills himself in his cell before Russ can investigate his claims. Rust returns to the Dory Lang murder site and discovers the same tree is now adorned with twig sculptures and a large wreath of vines and roots, all of them strategically placed. Rust returns to the school of Light and the Way, the Academy, and he finds more twig sculptures and dark imagery on the walls. And then fast forward to 2012, the 2 detectives that are interrogating Russ and Marty, or questioning them, tell Marty that they suspect Russ, who they allege conveniently led Marty to every clue or lead in the case and has been orchestrating the killings. Marty ends up just leaving as soon as he finds out that they're accusing Russ. This is absolutely ridiculous. Russ is also a person of interest in Billy Lee Tuttle's suspicious death 2 years earlier, which was around the time Russ returned to Louisiana. Russ walks out of the interview after the detectives accuse him, claiming, "You can follow me, but you got to get a search warrant if you want to see the stuff that's in, I believe, his storage unit."
Yeah, so this is where they really start pushing the maybe Rust is if not the killer, a killer whole thought, idea, suspicion, whatever you want to call it. You gave this summary in the easiest way possible, and that is chronologically, and it makes perfect sense when you do it that way. But one of the things about this show that I love so much and that I think is so appealing is their method of storytelling by jumping between these 3 storylines, certainly between 2 at any given time. 2012 and then wherever in the past we are, whether it's 95 or 02. And, also jumping between the actions that are happening, that are being described, and the actual interviews taking place. And so, the storytelling mechanism never gets stale because in one moment, Marty's telling you something and then you're seeing it happen. And then you're seeing Russ talk about it in 2012 and then, whatever. It's jumping around. And so, I think that's great. And while the editing for the previous episode, that single take and everything that's Emmy Award winning level editing, no question. In a subtle way, the editing in this episode is, actually in a way better because it's a tough episode to edit. I mean, if you look at it through the eyes of, I'm the guy who has to cut this together and make it coherent and intriguing and tell the story that I want to tell. It's expertly cut together. It's not just like they picked the good places to break a cut or whatever. I mean, where they chose to include, say, the 2012 interview or, the shooting board interview or the actual action, the way that they went about it, who's narrating, I mean, part of the time it's Marty, part of the time it's Rust. It's really complex editing, and I think it's even better than the previous episode, even though it's not as, bombastic. It's not as, doesn't make you sit back and go, whoa. But yeah, they find Ledoux. I mean, really, that's the long and the short of it. They find Ledoux. DeWall makes some statements that tie in, that tells them they're on the right track. I mean, he talks about Carcosa, like you said, and he talks, a little bit mystical and everything, which is perfectly in keeping with what they would expect. And then they get to their homestead there, and it's an interesting decision that they make not to call in reinforcements. And Russ just brushes it off right away, saying that you get a bunch of troopers out here, and then maybe Ledoux and DeWall and Reggie, they take off and scatter. I'm glad they addressed it at least, but it's kind of a weak reason. I mean, the reality is they would have been better off calling in reinforcements and going at it that way. But it's not nearly as exciting. I do like how, Rust can't. He asks Marty if he's ever been hunting, and then when Marty says he got a buck, he pretty much eviscerates his accomplishment. And it talks about him, hiding up in a tree stand, waiting for a horny deer to come along and smell his bait, and then shooting it, versus actual, tracking. And then when they get up there, I think it's interesting that, he knows that Rust is lying to him, and he says, yeah, I'll wait right here. You go call it in. He knows Rust is going to go do something, and then he won't let him do it by himself, which is an interesting development for these two, because, in all the buddy cop shows that you watch, even if they start out as an odd couple who hate each other, there's always something that happens that's bonding, and it's, I mean, the moment where they were in the bar after Marty's breakup and after the scene at the hospital in the previous episode, that would be a classic moment for us to see these two bond. And then, certainly what they went through, in the projects there where they're kidnapping Ginger and everything, all of that, you think would bond them together, but really they're not quite bonded yet, even though all that stuff happened. And yet Marty's sense of honor, I guess, or his sense of loyalty is a better word for it, won't let him leave. I mean, I think it's loyalty. I mean, what do you see it as?
I think it's loyalty. I think they've been through, at this point, a fair amount together, right? Like, they just did a highly illegal undercover operation, kidnapping. At this point, how long they've been working on this case for quite a while, right? And it's been consuming Rust's life. And Rust is pretty much all he has at this point right now, right? He doesn't know whether his marriage is going to last, and that's the interesting thing. Is it doesn't seem like
he's been living with him.
Yeah, he's been living with him, which I got this just somewhat of a tangent. Like, there's like a sitcom there. At least a couple of shorts of like Marty and Russ living in the same apartment together, and just like the arguments that they would be getting into would be like, Marty's like sitting there brushing his teeth or something like that, and Russ like, oh, you ever thought about like the meaning of brushing your teeth or something like that? And Marty just like losing his mind and just chucking a toothbrush at him or something. And I guess
they filmed a few more things while they were living together, but I think that I had read that they ditched him just because it didn't want to become too odd couple, and they wanted to move it forward to the actual operation. But yeah, I mean, and the one that they kept, Marty looking at the pupil mirror and trying to figure out how to use it. I think that was a pretty funny little that encapsulated it really well. But I mean, you're right. They have been through a lot, but I mean, Rust is still lying to Marty, right? I mean, yeah, I'll wait right here. So, I mean, I don't think really that they didn't. It was after this, by the end, after this event that they, I think, reached a point of bonding. Maybe not strong bonding, but they were bonded by both what was about to, the experience of what was about to happen, and then the reactions. The experience that was going to happen, the lie that they had to tell about it or choose to tell about it, and then the reactions that people have. All of those are bonding agents, I think, between the two of them, and it kind of, as we see, it keeps them fairly well bonded for 6-7 years.
Yeah, you mentioned them not wanting to call it in, or Russ not wanting to call it in. I kind of get it from Russ' perspective at the time, because the cops show up, they'll see that he's strung out on drugs, and you know what I mean? Like, are they even? I'm not a police officer. I don't know at that point, would they just be like, we're not doing anything about this? And then Reggie and Dewall would obviously get away, right? As soon as they find out that he's strung out on drugs, because he's very clearly strung out on drugs. And that they did his makeup and everything to make it look like he was messed up.
Yeah, I don't know that. Yeah, if they'd called him in, I don't know that would have been something that would have stopped the operation. I think if they were smart, they'd do like they always do. They'd have Marty take the lead in briefing everybody in and telling them what's going on, and and then they'd go forward. The bigger problem, and they never bring this up, but the bigger problem is that after being involved in a shooting, that they could be subject to a blood draw in some states, and that would not go well for, certainly not for Rust. I mean, he'd still have meth and coke in his system. So, but no movie is going to be 100% perfect. I mean, no show. I mean, you're going to have things that you could pick apart. I don't think it's a big deal. But again, the editing, right? Going back to the editing. I mean, once they approach the homestead and you get the tale being told by Marty to Papania and Gilboa, however you say it. And then you get Russ telling them the story, and then you get both Marty and Russ telling the story to the shooting board. And all of those things are interspersed with what you see actually happening, which of course tells you that the show itself is not an unreliable narrator. And in other words, Marty and Rust may lie frequently throughout the show, but whatever you see happening on the screen is real, because there's some chance that they weren't being 100% straight with us before that. Now for a fact that they are, because they're showing you the lie. And I just thought that was just so incredibly edited.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the only time that you see Russ actually somewhat a little happy is when he's telling this story about what happened at the compound, because he seems animated. He seems somewhat excited to talk about it. He's like, high rifle action, boom, 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 boom. And he's talking about like Captain America, Hero Marty. And I there's a part of me that goes like, tone it down a little bit, Russ. Like, you're supposed to be like the super depressed alcoholic. And all of a sudden you're talking about, you're lying about what happened at this compound. And you seem happy about it. Or like Marty's telling the story, and I wouldn't have thought anything about it the way Marty tells it. I'm like, oh, that's just how Marty acts. But the way Russ is acting in the scene, it seems like he's lying. It doesn't.
Marty's a natural storyteller, though, right? I mean, you see him at the bar in the first episode, I think it is, telling stories of his sexual exploits or whatever. I mean, he's a guy who can tell a story. He's used to telling a story. Rust, he has most of his conversations in his own head, like you pointed out earlier. So, he's a good communicator, but he's not necessarily a good storyteller. And so I think there's where the dissonance maybe comes from.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, in this whole sequence. I don't know if the filmmakers intended it, but I think we're supposed to draw parallels between Reggie Ledoux's cousin to Marty and Reggie Ledoux to Rust. And if Rust and Marty had gone down a slightly different road,
considerably different road, let's be honest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in Rust's case, not necessarily, because he was like a drug addict, right? So he very well could have, if he had gone undercover, say in this, I don't know, let's just a Bayou cult LSD drug making ring, he really easily could have just became Reggie, in my opinion, right? If he hadn't gotten out of it. I think that's what they were trying to go for, because you maybe less so with Dewall and Marty, but even then, like, Dewall's the guy. He's the one showing up. He's the one talking to Russ. Mm-hmm. And one of the more kind of David Lynchian type sequences in the series where there's the, David Lynch reference right there. And, DeWall immediately looks at Rust and he goes like, you got acid in your eyes. You got a shadow in you, boy. And it's just, you're sitting there and you're thinking like, oh, this is like, maybe this is like leading. When I initially watched the show, it's like, is this going to lead to like some supernatural element? And then
a lot of people were thinking that.
But I don't want to spoil it, but yeah, it's one of the more kind of bizarre scenes. And I thought he was supposed to kind of be a little bit like Russ. He's like the guy that goes and talks to people. He's more like the people person because there's no way that Reggie.
You mean Marty?
Oh, sorry, Marty. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no way that Reggie is going to go talk to the drug dealers to get the deal set.
No, he's all whacked out when he's talking to Rust. He's, sounding like Rust. He's spouting philosophical, time is a flat circle and I've seen how this ends and all this kind of stuff. So it's an interesting parallel that you draw there. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it's an interesting take.
And there's a moment there. So when he apprehends Reggie, and you mentioned it already, and Marty at one, but he's keeping both of them in place, right? Because Reggie's already been handcuffed, and DeWall standing there with I don't know, it looks like a box of like WD-40 or turpentine or whatever
chemicals, yeah.
Chemicals. The only reason I thought WD-40 is just because like it was like blue and in like a tin container or something like that. So don't be smoking meth, kids, or LSD, because this is how they're making it. And Reggie starts talking to him, and he starts talking about Carcosa and the Yellow King, and he mentions that time is a flat circle. And Russ, for a moment there, has a Marty moment where he tells him, just shut it, Nietzsche. Want to be Nietzsche, right? And I thought that was really well done. And then we see that Marty goes in and he sees what they've been doing to these kids, or he sees the state that these kids are in. And he comes right out, and one of the few moments that Marty is actually completely decisive, just blows Reggie's head right off. And surprisingly, when I initially had my first run through the show, I thought Russ was going to lose his mind, being like, what are you doing? Like, you just screwed everything up. You know what I mean? Like, not like I did all this work and then you screwed it all up. No, he goes, you know what, Marty, it's nice to see you commit to something for once. And just tells him, he goes, right? He goes, take that handcuff off, right? And so obviously the blood doesn't settle around the wrist, so they know that he was apprehended. And they go find an AK-47 that was on the compound, and they start setting up the lie almost immediately. But just how unnerving was
first DeWall runs and trips his own.
Oh yeah.
His own.
Yeah, he runs and blows himself up.
Claymore or whatever.
And but just how unnerving was Reggie in that entire sequence. At the same time, it says he's only on screen for literally like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And the way he's talking, you could tell that at one point there was somebody very much like Rust and Reggie, right? Like, you tell, I know it sounds crazy. It's like, oh, he's just like doing LSD ranting and stuff like that. But when he mentions, and we'll get into it when Rust actually starts talking about time being as a flat circle, you could tell at one point that there was a really intelligent guy here, and his brain has just been totally fried from LSD and meth use.
Right. Yeah. And then whatever religious nonsense that has been. Yeah. I never thought about it till you mentioned it, but I mean, he really is only on the screen for about 3 minutes. And then the one scene at the end of episode 3 where he doesn't say anything. It's just the image of him. But he might be the character, I mean, aside from Dora Lang, I guess, who has the most impact with the least amount of screen time.
Yeah. And if there's also, it's left up in the air too. Like, we're not going to get into the details, but like, what exactly were they doing with these kids? So obviously they were pumping them full of LSD and different types of drugs to get them into a catatonic state. I mean, the one kid was dead and they showed up. He had only been dead for a day, the boy, and the girl was just not there. Were they just prepping them for these religious rituals, or? No,
I think they were being abused as well. I mean, it's a jump ahead, but obviously, when in the next episode, when Rust renews his investigation, he eventually goes and talks to the girl, 7 years later. And, she says, the man with the scars was the worst. And, so obviously they were doing bad things to these kids. So, I mean, and for that reason, can you fault Marty like, is what Marty did, is it a form of justice? I mean, I think a lot of people would say it is, I mean, it's extra legal. It's vigilante. It's not, it's not legal justice by any means. And he did it under the color of authority and all the problems that come along with that. But just at a very basic level, I was surprised when it happened. I think a lot of people might have been surprised when it happened because, you don't often see that kind of thing be the result of a case, an investigation. It was an interesting choice that he made, but I don't think too many people were like, oh, wow, Marty's out of line here. I mean, for at least in the fictional world, we're probably thinking, yeah, he had it coming. And then the other guy, he just runs and blows himself up with his own stupid contraptions. I mean, that's just poetic justice there. I mean, and then, like you said, Rust goes straight into damage control, and he does a pretty good job of it. I mean, I think he needed to not empty the drum at the one location. I think he should have backed up the last quarter or so of the magazine and ended the shooting where Reggie Ledoux was shot, so that it makes more sense, because there's going to be shell ejections and they're going to be able to tell where somebody was standing approximately based on what the pattern of the ejected shells looks like. And he was a good 15, 20 yards away, it looked like, from where Ledoux was eventually shot. So that's something that good forensics would raise an eyebrow at. But then again, let's be honest, is this something maybe in that time, in that location, where they just shrug and move on because of who it was that got killed, and the fact that they had it coming, which is what most people would say about it. Now, I'm not condoning it in a real world sense, but in the dramatic fictional world that we're in here, I think most people would look at it that way. So, but Rust's decisiveness, and then how they're able to come up with a story and stick to it through all of the interviews and the shooting board, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I've often wondered if they had filmed a sequence where they filmed this exactly the way Rust and Marty lied about it. So like Reggie's there, or is DeWall, I can't remember who they said was firing the AK-47, and then paralleled it with like what was actually going on, because I kind of want to see the sequence of their lie on film, because that shot of Rush shooting the AK-47 is probably one of my favorite shots in the entire show.
Well, and there's so much wonderful dissonance when either Rust or Marty is describing, either in their 2012 interviews or before the shooting board, what it is that happened, and then we cut to the actual events, and it's so different, and that was jarring on first watch, especially. It was a jarring. The dissonance just really rang, and you really didn't know why they were doing that just yet, and then of course you figure it out when Marty executes Ledoux. So then this wraps it up, right? I mean, they walk out with the kids, they're heroes. The event is one of the reasons probably that Marty gets a second chance with Maggie. A few other reasons, of course, that he takes some actions that help him there, but they reconcile. Rust starts dating. I think you had mentioned when we were getting ready for the show how he starts dating this doctor, and that has an impact on him kind of settling down a little bit, so to speak. Again, the editing, right? I mean, what a great way to transition from 95 to 02, where they do a little bit with the interviews, and they let Marty voice over the fact that we're moving on. But then the images of his daughters kind of fighting, and then the one daughter throwing the tiara with the ribbons up into the tree. And then as we drift up to that tree, you see that the ribbons deteriorate and age. And then you get that final shot of it being, 7 years old up there. And then you pan back down, and now we're 7 years later. I mean, there's a lot of ways to show the passage of time in a film or a television show. And a lot of them are just accepted ways that tell us that that's what's happened, the fade and the dissolve and these kinds of things. But that was a very artistic way to show that, hey, we're in 2002 now. And you didn't have to get a little, 2002 on the screen or anything like that, because you knew that was going to be the next time period, because they'd been talking about how the next big event, the thing between Marty and Rust, happens in 2002. So when we bump to the future, you just, as the viewer, you instinctively know this is when it is. So I thought that was pretty masterful.
Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors.
Yeah, well, I guess the next big thing that happens in 2002 is we get a scene where Russ is interrogating some 2-bit criminal. I can't quite remember his name. He's more than a 2-bit criminal. He's up for a double murder charge, right? But he's like a meth addict, drug addict that shut up. I believe it was a pharmacy. He shot 2 people at a pharmacy and killed them. And Russ is able to coax a confession out of them, claiming like you got to confess if you want forgiveness, which is Russ using like religion in such a cynical way. Always said it bothers me. It bothers me on a spiritual level, but you know what? He got the guy to confess, right? So I mean, a good came out of it. But when he confesses and he realizes he screwed up, he goes, well, I want to make a deal. And Russell's like, well, what are you going to give me now? Like, I got you on a double murder charge, right? He mentions the Yellow King. He mentions the girl with the antlers on her head. He mentions Carcosa. And initially Russ is like, well, anyone could have read about the antlers and the girl, right? That was all in the newspaper, but the Yellow King wasn't in the newspaper and Carcosa wasn't in the newspaper. So Russ immediately goes, well, this guy knows something that I don't. Like, he knows, information because he says that killings are still going on. Russ loses his mind, starts smacking him around and makes the confession inadmissible. He walks away saying, well, we're going to come back and we're going to talk to him about what he's talking about Carcosa and the Yellow King. They never get a chance. Him and Marty go talk to him, and the witness had killed himself in his cell. And Russ speculates that when he went to go have his phone call, the other person on the other end had convinced him that he would have been better off just to kill himself. And that's probably what happened.
Yeah. And then we see Rust's obsession, and his hyper focus come into play again here. He does not like the idea that they didn't get their man and that somebody might still be out there. Bothers him. I mean, you don't see him lose his cool very often in this series, and he did lose it there. And even as he's approaching it very methodically and he's using good investigative tactics over the next few minutes of screen time, there's an edge to him that you don't necessarily see in the 1995 investigation. He's very methodical and calm in those scenes. And in 2002, faced with the possibility that Dora Lang's killer is still out there, he's more, there's an edge to him, and his tone is sharper. He's more demanding, asking for call logs and, print this phone and all, just the way he approaches everything is more confrontational and edgier. And so it's clear that it bothers him that this might be the case, that the killer is still out there.
It's interesting because earlier in the series, Marty accuses Rust of being myopic, but you could tell that Rust pretty much right from the get-go thought there was a much bigger thing going on here. Like, I don't think he ever articulated like a conspiracy, but you could tell that Rust thought it was really weird that they were so quick to try to get this task force on this. And then Billy Lee Tuttle was involved in it right away. And he points this out to Marty when they were driving in the car after they find out that the witness had killed himself, right? And Marty's reaction is, well, we got our guy. Like, what do you think? Like, the task force was in on it? What do you think? Like, the city government's in on this? And I think in the back of Rust's head, he always felt like that's what was going on with these murders.
Yeah, I think his unspoken answer was maybe, it's interesting that they have Marty ask incredulously, do you think the task force was in on it? And the next thing you see is them walking into the cell where the guy had killed himself. And they're like, how does this happen? That those events and those statements being sequenced that way really give, the viewer the impression that maybe, Rust is onto something. I agree with you. I think from the very beginning, he was skeptical that this was a one-man show, like that this was one guy who'd only done this one killing. I mean, right away, he says he'll do this again, and this probably isn't his first. And then, so he's not afraid to embrace these ideas. But it's interesting because all of these thoughts and all of these, all of his actions are viewed through a completely different lens by Papania and Gilbo in 2012, and they see them as very suspicious. And eventually here in this, in the latter half of this episode, they start laying all that out for Marty and even for Rust as they essentially make an accusation. And Rust's reaction is to tell him, no, they can't search his storage area, get a warrant and arrest me if you're going to. Otherwise you waste my day. Thanks for nothing but the beer. And he gets up and leaves. And the interesting thing as he leaves is he's in the same building where he worked all those years, him and Marty,
Yeah.
And you see people look at him in like with an odd like expression, like there's kind of awe and wonder there, like that's Rust Cole, and then of course the next reaction is, Jesus, what happened to him? But I mean, he was a legend there, and now he's coming in not looking like, looking like he could be a killer, I thought it was interesting the way they played that. And then even in the last scene where they have him, at that school that you mentioned and, finding the stick design thing and holding it up and looking at it as they pan backwards, I mean, they're really trying to make you think that maybe he's just being cuckoo crazy here. And he's like, basking in this, this design or whatever, rather than examining it and trying to figure it out. So I thought that was, another way that they tried to make you think that it was Rust. And then even as they pull out between the pane of windows, there's a black star drawn on the broken window pane there, the shard of glass that's still in the window. Just no more another symbol of this weird cult that he's pretty convinced exists and is responsible for some of the killings. But that's not what Papania and Gilbo think. They think, that's Rust. And they must think it pretty, like, they must have it as a pretty solid theory, because they show that they've given it a lot of thought. They've ran down evidence. It wasn't just some idle theory. They searched out evidence to try to either support it or knock it down. And they still think it was Rust. So that's interesting.
I never really bought the whole, even my initial run through, I never bought the whole Rust is the killer thing. I just thought this TV show has gone out of its way to be not the typical cop TV show. And I go, maybe it could have worked in the typical cop TV show, Rust being the killer, but I never bought it. And like we pointed out earlier, the whole biker sequence didn't make sense.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I think
why would he go to all that trouble?
Yeah. I think a lot of people were somewhat convinced, though. I remember at the time initially watching the show and people were like, whoa, is Rust the killer? It makes sense. And I'm like, I remember telling people, I'm like, it doesn't make sense. Like, why would he do the whole biker thing and the whole like killing Reggie Ledoux and like his cousin? Like, were they going to go start talking anytime soon? Like, it just didn't, you know what I mean? It just, I don't know. It didn't make much sense to me. So I thought it would, out of like in a fantastic TV show, I thought it was one of the weaker things that they kind of threw out there. Or maybe they did that on purpose, as being like,
sure, of course they did. It's a red herring, right? They wanted people to wonder. And it had to have some effect, because I mean, we're jumping ahead again, but when Rust gets Marty to pull over in the next episode or early on, he like he's concerned, like he's not 100% sure, even though he says he is to the detectives. So it wasn't just some viewers who were taken in by the red herring and wondered, even Rust's friend, had a bit of a concern there. And I mean, they make Rust out to be, he's a little crazy, and for lack of a better term. And so I don't think it wasn't a hard stretch to try to create this red herring. But yeah, I didn't catch it the first time. I was too engrossed in the experience, but on this rewatch, it was like, well, yeah, that red herring makes no sense, because, anybody who thinks about it is going to immediately figure out, there are a lot of easier ways to accomplish what he accomplished that weren't so high risk, low reward. I mean, risk, I think Rust is someone who would go with a high risk, high reward scenario, but he would try to go with as many low risk, high rewards, as possible. And that whole biker scenario was not low risk at all. But again, they make you wonder, at least the general viewer, I think, wonders. And Rust's behavior all the way through is the same, except he's a little edgier, like I said, I think in 2002. But the filmmaker, the showrunners, the director, the writer, or whatever, they just basically, they kind of take a different lens and pop a different lens in there for you to see that behavior through. Like early on, the lens they put in there is, eccentric, doesn't care, a little bit weird, but that's the lens annoying, that's the lens they want you to look through. And now in this episode, they pop that lens out. They pop in the more foreboding, sort of mysterious, oh, maybe he's the killer lens, and show you Rust's behavior through that lens. And I think they did a good job, but I don't remember being taken in by it. And I certainly, stumbled on it quite a bit in this rewatch. But I do, here's the thing though, it works because I do understand why Papania and Gilbo would think that. I don't think their reasoning is unsound, and it even makes Marty wonder. And so it works from a narrative standpoint, from a storytelling standpoint, whether the viewer buys it or not, that's just the viewer's independent experience. But within the story, I don't think Gilbo and Papania are idiots or anything like that. I think that they've got good reason.
As the viewer, we saw the whole biker sequence, but they don't know anything about it.
Yeah, all they know is a CI put them on to the location. Well, that just reinforces their theory. I mean, that some unknown CI of Rust's told you where Reggie Ledoux and DeWalt Ledoux were cooking. How convenient. Now you can go there and kill them. And I mean, and it's funny too, because like Marty accuses Rust of myopia. He accuses Rust of like seeing things a certain way and then twisting or interpreting the clues to reinforce that narrative. And he's not entirely wrong either. And from a conceptual standpoint, he's absolutely right. But he's not entirely wrong that Rust does that sometimes, to a degree. But boy, that's what these two detectives are doing for sure, right? They're falling prey to that same thing. They've decided Rust is a suspect, with good cause. I mean, he's hanging out at the crime scene, reappearing after being off the grid for 8 years. It is suspicious. I'd be looking at him, and he doesn't act normal in their interviews either, and so, they're not bad cops by any means. They're just very traditional, in their approach. And in that respect, actually very realistic. But I don't know. I think these are two of the strongest episodes of the entire, series, all 8. And they're two of the best edited episodes for two different reasons. I mean, one was the single take, and then I thought the editing in this most recent episode, it was low key. You didn't notice how great the editing was, which is why it's great editing. And I'm curious, I should go look at the Emmys for whatever year this came out. I think 2014, and see if they won anything for editing or whatever, because they certainly deserved it.
Yeah. I'll mention one thing before I get into my favorite quote and we kind of wrap up here was, you mentioned Russ, and he's at the school again that they initially went to that had been shut down, and he's looking at the twig figures and the black stars and the dark imagery in the wall, and he's kind of basking in it. I think he is kind of basking in it, because he does quickly ask Reggie when they're at the compound. He goes, "Why the antlers?" He wants to understand. Yeah. He wants to understand.
He's basking in the mystery, right?
Yeah. He wants to understand, what is it that these people believe? I do, and he's taking it all in. He obviously not interested in the sense of like, oh, I want to go join them. Interested in the sense like, how can somebody go down this type of path, right? Because Russ is the type of guy I think that's really interested. Well, I know is interested in ideas. He's interested in worldviews, and he's trying to understand, how does this happen? And then I guess this cuts to probably my favorite quote in the entire series, that he takes directly from Reggie, right? He goes, "Bleep, I don't want to know anything anymore. This is a world where nothing is solved. Someone once told me time is a flat circle. Everything we've ever done or will do, we're going to do over and over again. And that little boy and that little girl, they're going to be in that room again and again and again forever." And it's that whole, the way he delivers it's chilling, it's haunting. And this is somewhat, it's not a tangent actually, but there's a philosophical term for this. Like Friedrich Nietzsche actually came up. It's called the Great Reoccurrence, but Arthur Schopenhauer talked about this too. I don't think people really understand, because I tried to explain this to a girl at work one time. Now, she's young in terms of what I mean by like time being a flat circle. And I'm explaining it to her. I'm like, well, over a long enough time period, you end up back at this point, right? She said, well, that doesn't make any sense. And I go, think about it this way. And I think maybe something somewhat clicked in her head. So the Big Bang happens, right? And then you go around in this circle, and then something, the anti-Big Bang happens, right? And it blows out existence. And then the Big Bang happens again. And the theory goes that, okay, the Big Bang is going to be almost exactly the same as the one that we had before. And inevitably, all these particles and atoms are going to end up forming exactly the way they did before. And events that happened on Earth, right, that in your life, you're just going to end up reliving it again and again and again and again. People don't. It's a crazy idea. But when you step back and you think, obviously, there's problems with the details, and I'm sure there would be some scientists, well, this wouldn't happen or what have you. But the big scope of it, though, it's not a crazy idea to think that time just repeats itself over a long enough circle. Like Hinduism, the religion itself is somewhat based on this principle that time is not linear, that time is a circle, and we just go through these cycles and these ages, and they just end up happening again and again and again and again. Like people argue that that's one reason that Western civilization always kind of had an advantage over, say, other civilizations, where a lot of other civilizations, they view time as the circle, like Russ sees it, where Western civilization is, to a degree, always viewed time as linear. So we're always going somewhere. So we got to this point, then we got to get to this next point, and it's going to an end point that we don't necessarily know what that end point is. Where say take Indian civilization or Hindu civilization, they already know what that endpoint is. It's just going to be right back to where they are right now. It's a totally different kind of way of viewing time in history and philosophy. And the way Russ puts it, it's chilling to think that those kids are just going to wind up back in that room again through no fault of their own, other than just being a prisoner of this time loop.
Which is part of the reason I think he drinks so much, to be honest with you. Because, I mean, it is a chilling passage, and I'm not surprised you picked it out. The performance by McConaughey is amazing too, but it's depressing, right? In this, the overall concept isn't depressing, but the fact that the way it applies to these individuals is very depressing, and I can see why it bothers him. My favorite line in this episode is, or in these two episodes, I guess, is more Russ being sarcastic. I mean, I do love where he tells Marty, this is none of my business. I don't want to hear it and all that. But when they're at the trailer getting ready to go do the rip at the drug stash house, and he's asking them about their plan, like, how are you going to get in? How are you going to find the house? Do you have an exit plan? Whatever. And they don't their plan is so half-assed. It's, very, very barely a plan. And the one guy's like, if trouble comes along, you just do this and that, just, a bunch of platitudes or whatever. And Russ just says, oh, so you have thought it out. My bad. He's just so sarcastic. It cracks me up, because none of them know. I mean, they probably took him at face value when he said that. Like, yeah, we have thought it out. I'm glad you're seeing it our way. When he's just, his intellectual arrogance is shining through there, and his contempt. It's pretty funny. But yeah, I think these were two great episodes, and maybe like I said, the two best episodes of the entire season. I don't know for sure, but definitely up there for very different reasons. And we've got two episodes left. The 6 and 7 we're going to talk about next episode, and then of course we'll talk about 8 and then a little bit about the seasons 2 and 3. Just a quick overview of those to round out the final episode of this series.
Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for next week, because we're doing the next 2 episodes, and they're quite intense. Like I said, I'm watching them. I'm rewatching this as we're recording them. I've seen the whole show, so I already know the ending. I think when we get to the final episode, I think me and Frank are probably going to argue back and forth exactly what the meaning of the final episode is. But
Looking forward to that then.
Yeah, I think we're going to get into a bit of a debate about that, but yeah,
well, as long as we don't get into the big fight like Rust and Marty do in the next episode, then I don't want that.
Yeah. So, time's a flat circle, guys. Stay tuned for the next episode.